Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, Rachel found herself replaying the day's events in her mind. She sat on the edge of their backyard patio, a cup of tea warming her hands, while Mark grilled dinner nearby. The scent of burgers wafted through the air, but Rachel's thoughts were far from food. Karen's words still echoed faintly in her mind, not because they hurt anymore, but because she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Mark noticed her quiet demeanor and flipped the last burger before joining her at the table. "You okay?" he asked gently, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Rachel nodded but didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared out into the distance, watching the neighborhood lights flicker on one by one. Finally, she spoke. "She doesn't get it," Rachel said, her voice steady but tinged with frustration. "People like her think they can judge others based on how they look without ever stopping to consider what someone has been through." Mark leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "What are you thinking?" he asked, knowing full well that when Rachel got that determined glint in her eye, she was already 2 steps ahead. "I'm thinking we need to make sure everyone knows exactly who I am, and why those scars mean something," Rachel replied firmly. Her tone wasn't angry. It was resolute, as if she'd just made up her mind about something important. Mark raised an eyebrow, intrigued but slightly worried. "What do you have in mind?" Rachel smiled faintly. "Tomorrow morning, I'm going to the HOA meeting." The next day, Rachel arrived at the community center early, dressed casually but confidently in jeans and a crisp white blouse. She carried a folder filled with documents, photos, and notes, everything she needed to tell her story. As neighbors trickled in for the monthly meeting, whispers rippled through the room. Word had spread quickly about the poolside incident, and many were curious to see how things would unfold. Some came to support Rachel, while others simply wanted to witness the drama firsthand. When the meeting began, Karen wasted no time taking center stage. Clutching her clipboard like a weapon, she launched into a rehearsed speech about maintaining standards in the community. Her thinly veiled jabs at Rachel weren't subtle. She talked about appropriate behavior and setting examples, all while casting pointed glances in Rachel's direction. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing where this was headed. Finally, it was Rachel's turn to speak. Standing up, she walked to the front of the room, her posture calm and confident. The chatter died down almost instantly as everyone turned to face her. For a moment, there was only silence. Then Rachel began to talk, not angrily or defensively, but with quiet strength. "I know some of you may have heard about what happened at the pool yesterday," she started, her voice carrying clearly across the room. "And I want to take this opportunity to share my side, not just for me, but for anyone who's ever felt judged unfairly." She opened her folder and held up a photo of the burning warehouse from last year's fire. Thick black smoke billowed into the sky, flames licking hungrily at the structure. "This is where I got these scars," she explained, pointing to her arms. "I was leading my team inside to rescue families trapped on the 2nd floor. It was chaos. People screaming, smoke everywhere, and no time to waste. We managed to save everyone, but it came at a cost." As she spoke, Rachel showed more pictures, her team standing outside the smoldering building, covered in soot. Newspaper clippings praising their bravery, letters of gratitude from the families they'd saved. Each image told a story of courage and sacrifice, and the room grew quieter with every word. Even Karen seemed momentarily stunned, her usual confidence wavering. Rachel paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "These scars aren't ugly to me," she continued. "They're reminders of why I do what I do, to protect people, to help them when they need it most. And yes, maybe they make some people uncomfortable, but instead of teaching our kids to look away or judge, shouldn't we be teaching them to ask questions, to learn about the stories behind the things they don't understand?" Her final statement struck a chord. People nodded in agreement, some even whispering words of encouragement. Karen, however, looked increasingly flustered. When Rachel finished speaking, the room erupted into applause, a sound that sent a clear message. Karen's bullying tactics wouldn't fly here anymore. On a warm Saturday afternoon, the sun hung high in the sky, casting golden rays over the quiet suburban neighborhood. The air was filled with the faint hum of cicadas and the occasional splash from the community pool. Mark and his wife, Rachel, had decided to spend their day off relaxing by the water. It was rare for them to have such a peaceful moment together without work or chores pulling them apart. They'd brought along towels, sunscreen, and a small cooler with cold drinks, ready to enjoy the simple pleasures of life. Rachel hesitated for a moment before slipping into her swimsuit. Her reflection in the mirror earlier had reminded her of the scars that covered parts of her arms and shoulders, marks left behind from a fire years ago. She wasn't ashamed of them. They were proof of her bravery as a fire captain who had saved countless lives. But being around strangers always made her feel uneasy. What if someone stared? What if they judged her? Mark noticed her pause but didn't say anything. He simply squeezed her hand, offering silent support. "You look beautiful," he whispered, knowing she needed to hear it. With a deep breath, Rachel smiled back at him and stepped outside. At the pool, families lounged on colorful chairs, kids splashed playfully in the shallow end, and teenagers laughed loudly near the diving board. The scene was lively yet serene. Mark and Rachel found 2 empty lounge chairs under a striped umbrella and settled down. Rachel adjusted her sunglasses, trying to blend into the background. Mark cracked open a soda and handed it to her, making light conversation about their plans for dinner later. For a while, everything felt normal. The sound of laughter echoed around them, and the cool breeze carried the scent of chlorine. But then Karen appeared. She was hard to miss, always dressed impeccably, clipboard in hand, scanning the area like she owned the place. Everyone knew Karen. She was the self-appointed enforcer of the Homeowners Association, HOA, notorious for nitpicking every minor rule violation. Whether it was someone's towel touching the grass or music playing too loudly, Karen made sure everyone knew she was watching. Today, however, she seemed particularly focused. Her sharp eyes landed on Rachel almost immediately. Karen strode over, her heels clicking against the pavement. She stopped beside Rachel's chair, her lips curling into a smirk. Without so much as a greeting, she gestured vaguely toward Rachel's arms. "You know," Karen began, her voice loud enough for nearby neighbors to hear, "there are rules about appropriate attire at the pool. Maybe you should consider covering up. Some things are just better left unseen." Her tone was dripping with disdain, each word cutting through the otherwise pleasant atmosphere. Rachel froze, her heart sinking. She hadn't expected this kind of comment, especially not here, where people were supposed to come to relax and enjoy themselves. Mark sat up straighter, his jaw tightening as he glared at Karen. He wanted nothing more than to confront her right then and there, but he bit his tongue, waiting to see how Rachel would respond. Around them, other residents exchanged uncomfortable glances, unsure whether to intervene or stay out of it. The cheerful ambience of the poolside vanished, replaced by an awkward tension that lingered in the air. Karen's words hung in the air like a storm cloud, casting a shadow over the once peaceful poolside. Her smirk lingered as she glanced around, clearly enjoying the attention her comment had drawn. A few nearby neighbors shifted uncomfortably in their seats, pretending to focus on their phones or the kids splashing in the water. Others exchanged quick glances, silently debating whether to speak up or stay out of it. But no one said a word. Rachel felt the weight of Karen's words pressing down on her. Her scars, which she had worked so hard to accept and embrace, suddenly felt exposed and raw. She wanted to shrink away, to disappear into the lounge chair and avoid the stares she could feel burning into her skin. But deep down, something inside her stirred, a quiet fire that refused to let Karen's cruelty go unchallenged. Mark, sitting beside her, was visibly seething. His hands gripped the arms of his chair tightly, his knuckles turning white. He opened his mouth to respond, ready to defend his wife with every ounce of anger bubbling inside him. But before he could say anything, Rachel placed a gentle hand on his arm. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. She didn't need him to fight this battle for her. This was her moment to stand up, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been judged unfairly. Taking a slow, steadying breath, Rachel removed her sunglasses and looked directly at Karen. Her voice was calm but firm as she began to speak. "These scars," she said, gesturing to her arms, "aren't something I'm ashamed of. They're part of who I am." Her words caught Karen off guard, and for a split second, the smirk faltered. Encouraged by the sudden crack in Karen's confident demeanor, Rachel continued. "I got these while saving lives," she explained, her tone steady but tinged with emotion. "There was a massive fire at a warehouse downtown last year. Families were trapped inside, and my team and I risked everything to get them out safely. These scars are a reminder of that day, the heat, the smoke, the fear, but also the courage it took to push through it all." As Rachel spoke, the atmosphere around the pool began to shift. The awkward silence gave way to murmurs of admiration. One woman whispered to her friend, "Wow, she's a firefighter." Another man nodded in respect, his earlier discomfort replaced by awe. Even the children playing in the water seemed to sense the change, their laughter softening as they noticed the adults paying close attention. Karen, however, wasn't ready to back down. She crossed her arms and rolled her eyes theatrically, trying to regain control of the situation. "Well, that's admirable," she said dismissively, though her voice lacked conviction. "But we still have rules here. Maybe you should think about how your appearance affects others." Her attempt to pivot back to her original complaint only made her seem more out of touch. Rachel raised an eyebrow, her composure unwavering. "You know, Karen," she replied, her tone polite but pointed, "rules are important. But so is kindness. And if you spent half as much time thinking about how your words affect people as you do enforcing those rules, maybe this neighborhood would be a better place." The crowd erupted into muffled chuckles, and even some of Karen's usual supporters looked away, embarrassed for her. For the first time, Karen appeared unsure of herself. She glanced around, searching for allies, but found none. Realizing she had lost the audience, she muttered something under her breath and walked off, her clipboard clutched tightly against her chest like a shield. Though the confrontation was over, its impact lingered. Neighbors who had previously kept their distance from Rachel now smiled warmly at her, offering nods of approval. Mark leaned over and kissed her temple, pride shining in his eyes. Rachel, however, remained thoughtful. She knew Karen wouldn't let this go easily, and she was right. The applause lingered in the air, filling the community center with a sense of unity and admiration for Rachel. For the first time in years, the room felt alive, not with tension or forced politeness, but with genuine connection. Neighbors who had barely spoken to each other before exchanged smiles and nods, united by Rachel's powerful words. Karen, however, stood frozen at the front of the room, her clipboard clutched tightly against her chest like a shield. Her face flushed red, not just from embarrassment, but from the realization that she had underestimated Rachel and lost control of the narrative. Determined not to let the momentum slip away, Karen cleared her throat loudly, trying to reclaim the spotlight. "Well, that was inspiring," she began, forcing a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But we're here today to discuss community standards, not personal stories." She flipped through her notes dramatically, as if searching for something to steer the conversation back to her agenda. "And speaking of standards, there are asterisk rules about appropriate behavior at the pool. Disturbing other residents, especially with loud outbursts, is unacceptable." Her attempt to pivot back to her usual script only made her seem more out of touch. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some expressing disbelief while others outright scoffed. One elderly man leaned over to his wife and muttered, "If anyone's disturbing people, it's her." Karen shot him a sharp look, but he simply shrugged and went back to sipping his coffee. Rachel, still standing near the front of the room, crossed her arms, and raised an eyebrow. Loud outbursts, she repeated calmly, her tone laced with quiet sarcasm. Is that what you're calling standing up for myself when someone mocks my appearance? Because I thought that was called having dignity. The room erupted into laughter, lightening the mood even further. Karen's cheeks burned brighter, and she fumbled with her papers, clearly flustered. But she wasn't ready to give up. If anything, Rachel's growing popularity only fueled her determination to take her down. Turning to the HOA board members seated at the table, Karen adopted a formal tone. I'd like to formally submit a complaint against Rachel for causing a disturbance at the pool. This kind of behavior sets a bad example for our community. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. They were used to Karen's nitpicking, but this felt different. Rachel wasn't just any resident. She was a respected fire captain with a story that resonated deeply with everyone in the room. One board member, a middle-aged woman named Linda, finally spoke up. Karen, do you have any evidence to support this claim? She asked, her voice neutral but firm. Evidence, Karen echoed, caught off guard by the question. She hesitated, then stammered. Well, I mean, there were witnesses. People saw how disruptive she was being. Rachel stepped forward again, her expression calm but resolute. Actually, she said, pulling out her phone, I have evidence too. She tapped the screen a few times and turned it toward the board. On the display was a short video clip taken from the pool's security camera. It showed Karen approaching Rachel, making her cutting remarks, and walking away smugly. The footage was grainy but clear enough to capture the entire exchange. A collective gasp swept through the room. Even Karen looked stunned, though she quickly tried to recover. That's private property, she protested, pointing at the screen. You can't just. It's public footage, Rachel interrupted smoothly. The HOA installed these cameras for safety reasons, remember? Besides, I checked with management. They gave me permission to review it. She paused, letting that sink in before continuing. I also brought testimonials from my colleagues and copies of news articles about the fire. I wanted to make sure everyone understood exactly who I am and why those scars matter. Karen's confidence crumbled under the weight of Rachel's preparation. She glanced around the room, searching for allies, but found none. The neighbors who had once tolerated her antics now avoided her gaze altogether. Some even whispered among themselves, sharing their own frustrations with her constant policing and condescending attitude. Realizing she was losing ground fast, Karen switched tactics. Fine, she snapped, throwing her hands up in exasperation. Maybe I went too far. But don't think this is over. With that, she stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. The room erupted into murmurs once again, but this time, they were filled with relief and triumph. Mark, who had been sitting quietly in the back, stood up and walked over to Rachel, giving her a proud hug. You did amazing, he whispered. Rachel smiled faintly, though her expression remained thoughtful. She knew Karen. The days following the HOA meeting felt like a turning point for the neighborhood. Word of Rachel's powerful speech and Karen's humiliating exit spread quickly, becoming the talk of the community. Neighbors who had previously kept to themselves began stopping by Rachel and Mark's house to introduce themselves properly. Some brought baked goods or small tokens of appreciation, while others simply wanted to share their own stories of frustration with Karen's overbearing behavior. The once divided neighborhood now buzzed with newfound energy, a sense of camaraderie that hadn't existed before. Karen, however, wasn't ready to fade into the background. Though she avoided public appearances after her dramatic exit from the meeting, whispers circulated that she was working behind the scenes to rally support. She sent emails to select board members, claiming Rachel was disrupting harmony in the community and demanding stricter enforcement of rules. But her efforts fell flat. The board members, swayed by Rachel's courage and authenticity, dismissed her complaints as petty grievances rather than legitimate concerns. Meanwhile, Rachel decided it was time to take things one step further. She reached out to local news outlets, sharing her story not to shame Karen, but to raise awareness about resilience and acceptance. Within days, a reporter visited the neighborhood to interview Rachel, capturing footage of her speaking passionately about her work as a fire captain and the importance of treating others with kindness. The segment aired on the evening news, showcasing Rachel's bravery and highlighting the positive changes happening in the community. When the story went live, it resonated far beyond the confines of the subdivision. Friends, family, and even strangers flooded Rachel's inbox with messages of support. One woman wrote to thank her for inspiring her teenage daughter, who had been bullied for a birthmark on her face. Another man shared how Rachel's words reminded him of his late father, a firefighter who had also carried physical scars from saving lives. Each message reinforced Rachel's belief that vulnerability could spark meaningful change. But Karen's reaction was anything but gracious. When she saw the news segment, her face turned pale with rage. Sitting alone in her living room, clutching the remote control, she replayed the clip over and over, seething at every word of praise directed at Rachel. To make matters worse, the backlash against Karen intensified online. Social media posts criticizing her entitled behavior went viral, with hashtags like #StandWithRachel trending locally. Commenters called her out for her lack of empathy, urging the HOA to remove her from her position altogether. Feeling cornered, Karen made one last desperate attempt to regain control. She drafted a lengthy letter addressed to all residents, accusing Rachel of orchestrating a personal vendetta against her and insisting she was being unfairly targeted. She distributed copies around the neighborhood, slipping them under doors and leaving them on windshields. At first glance, the letter seemed formal and professional, but upon closer inspection, it came across as defensive and unhinged. Instead of rallying support, Karen's letter only deepened the divide. Neighbors openly mocked its tone, calling it drama-worthy and off the rails. During a casual coffee chat at the community clubhouse, Linda, the same board member who had challenged Karen during the meeting, laughed as she read excerpts aloud. "Listen to this part," she said, holding up the letter. "I have dedicated countless hours to ensuring our community thrives." Thrives? More like survives her constant nitpicking. The laughter rippled through the group, solidifying their collective stance against Karen. Emboldened by the growing unity, several residents decided to formally petition the HOA to revoke Karen's leadership role. They gathered signatures, citing her inability to foster positivity and inclusivity within the neighborhood. By the end of the week, nearly half the households had signed on, not just to oppose Karen, but to celebrate Rachel as a symbol of strength and compassion. When the next HOA meeting rolled around, the atmosphere was electric. Residents packed the room, eager to see how the board would handle the situation. Karen arrived late, looking frazzled and disheveled, a stark contrast to her usual polished appearance. As the board reviewed the petition and discussed Karen's conduct, it became clear that her reign was coming to an end. After much deliberation, they announced their decision. Karen would no longer serve as head of the committee. Her duties would be redistributed among other members, effective immediately. The room erupted into applause, signaling a fresh start for the community. Karen slumped in her seat, defeated, while Rachel sat quietly beside Mark, a small smile playing. The aftermath of the HOA's decision brought a wave of change to the neighborhood, like the first warm breeze of spring melting away winter's chill. With Karen stripped of her leadership role, the oppressive cloud that had hung over the community began to lift. Neighbors who had once tiptoed around her rules now felt free to breathe easier, their shoulders visibly lighter. The clubhouse bulletin board, once plastered with Karen's nitpicky notices about lawn length and holiday decorations, was replaced with cheerful flyers for upcoming events, a block party, a book club meeting, even a fire safety workshop hosted by none other than Rachel. Karen, on the other hand, retreated into near isolation. She stopped attending HOA meetings altogether and rarely ventured outside except for essential errands. Her absence didn't go unnoticed, but it wasn't mourned either. Instead, people talked about how much more pleasant life had become without her constant policing. One afternoon, While pushing her grocery cart through the local supermarket, Karen overheard two women chatting in the produce aisle. "You know," one said, "I never realized how tense she made everything until she was gone. It's like we can finally relax." Karen hurried past them, pretending not to hear, but her face flushed red with humiliation. Despite the growing positivity in the neighborhood, Rachel remained cautious. She knew Karen well enough by now to suspect this wasn't truly the end. Sure enough, a few days later, Rachel found an envelope slipped under her front door. Inside was a handwritten note from Karen, surprisingly devoid of its usual sharp tone. "Rachel," it began, "I owe you an apology. I acted out of line, and I regret any pain I caused you. I hope someday you can forgive me." Mark raised an eyebrow when Rachel showed him the note. "Do you think she means it?" he asked skeptically. Rachel studied the words again, her expression thoughtful. "Honestly, probably not entirely," she admitted. "But I think she's scared. Losing control hit her hard, and now she's trying to save face." Rachel decided to respond, not with anger or dismissal, but with grace. She wrote back a simple reply. "Thank you for apologizing. Everyone makes mistakes, and I appreciate your willingness to acknowledge yours. Moving forward, I hope we can focus on building a kinder, stronger community together." She left the note in Karen's mailbox the next morning, unsure if it would make a difference but knowing it was worth the effort. Meanwhile, the neighborhood continued to flourish. The block party turned out to be a huge success, with families gathering in the cul-de-sac for food, music, and laughter. Kids ran around playing tag, while adults mingled over plates of homemade dishes. Rachel stood near the grill alongside Mark, flipping burgers and sharing stories with neighbors. At one point, Linda approached her with a warm smile. "You've really changed things around here," she said sincerely. "People are happier, closer. It's like you woke us up." Rachel chuckled modestly. "I didn't do anything special," she replied. "Sometimes all it takes is standing up for what's right to remind people of their own strength." As the weeks went by, Rachel noticed subtle shifts in Karen's behavior too. Though she still kept mostly to herself, there were small signs of change. She waved awkwardly when passing Rachel in the driveway, her gestures tentative but genuine. During a community cleanup day organized by the new HOA leaders, Karen even showed up, albeit briefly, to help pick up trash along the sidewalks. No one pressured her to participate. They simply nodded politely when she joined in, treating her like any other neighbor. For Rachel, these moments reinforced her belief in second chances. She didn't trust Karen completely, nor did she expect their relationship to transform overnight. But seeing Karen take steps, however small, toward redemption gave Rachel hope. It reminded her that even those who cause harm have the capacity to grow, given the opportunity. By the end of the month, the neighborhood felt unrecognizable from the divided, tense place it had been just weeks earlier. New friendships blossomed, old grievances faded, and a spirit of collaboration replaced the fear and resentment Karen had cultivated. For Rachel, the transformation was bittersweet. While she was proud of what she had helped achieve, she couldn't help but reflect on the deeper lesson behind it all. Kindness isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is extend compassion, even to those who don't seem to deserve it. As the weeks turned into months, Rachel found herself settling into a rhythm she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of peace and belonging that came not from solitude, but from connection. The neighborhood had transformed into something vibrant and alive, a place where people genuinely cared about one another. Invitations to barbecues, holiday gatherings, and casual coffee mornings became regular occurrences, and Rachel was often at the center of it all. Her courage in standing up to Karen had inspired others to step out of their shells too, creating a ripple effect of positivity. One Saturday morning, Rachel decided to host a fire safety workshop for the community. She set up tables in the clubhouse parking lot, filling them with pamphlets, first aid kits, and even a small display of firefighting gear. Children gathered around excitedly as she demonstrated how to use a fire extinguisher, while parents listened intently to her tips on creating emergency plans for their homes. "It's not just about putting out fires," she explained with a warm smile. "It's about being prepared and looking out for each other." The event drew more attendees than Rachel had expected, including some faces she hadn't seen in ages. Even Karen made a brief appearance, lingering near the edge of the crowd. Though she didn't stay long, her presence spoke volumes. Afterward, Rachel received several messages thanking her for organizing the workshop. One neighbor wrote, "You've given us so much more than safety tips. You've reminded us what it means to be a real community." Mark watched all of this unfold with quiet pride. He loved seeing Rachel embrace her role as both a leader and a friend. Gone was the hesitation he'd noticed earlier when they visited the pool. Now, Rachel carried herself with confidence, unafraid to share her story or advocate for others. Her scars, once a source of insecurity, had become symbols of resilience, proof that strength isn't defined by appearances but by actions. Karen, for her part, continued to keep a low profile. She attended fewer neighborhood events but occasionally contributed in small ways, like donating supplies for a school fundraiser or offering to water plants for a family going out of town. These gestures were met with polite gratitude rather than suspicion, signaling a slow but steady thaw in her relationship with the community. While no one forgot her past behavior, they chose to focus on the present, a decision that required effort but ultimately benefited everyone. By winter, the neighborhood felt like an entirely different place. Holiday lights twinkled in windows, carolers strolled through the streets, and neighbors exchanged gifts during a secret Santa exchange organized by Rachel and Linda. At the annual Christmas party, Rachel stood beside Mark, holding a mug of hot cocoa as snow began to dust the ground outside. "Do you remember how things used to be?" Mark asked softly, his breath forming tiny clouds in the chilly air. Rachel nodded, smiling wistfully. "I do, but I'm glad we're here now." She glanced around the room, taking in the laughter and warmth surrounding her. For the first time in years, she felt truly at home, not because everything was perfect, but because imperfections were accepted and embraced. Later that evening, as the party wound down, Rachel pulled Mark aside. "You know," she said, her voice tinged with emotion, "this whole experience has taught me something important. Those scars, they'll always remind me of the fire, yes, but they also remind me of what came after, the lives I saved, the challenges I overcame, and the community I helped build." Mark wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "And don't forget the person you are," he added. "Strong, brave, compassionate. You inspire people, Rach, not because of your title or your scars, but because of who you are." Rachel leaned into him, feeling a deep sense of contentment. Life wasn't without its struggles, but she knew she could face anything as long as she had love, support, and purpose. And as the snow fell gently outside, blanketing the neighborhood in quiet beauty, Rachel realized something else. Sometimes, the hardest battles lead to the brightest beginnings.